The sun was soft that morning, spilling through the curtains like a gentle reminder that time never stops. Not for anyone. Margaret Hayes sat by the window of her favorite room, her hands resting on a cup of tea gone cold hours ago. Her reflection on the glass looked fragile, but her mind, still sharp. At 93, she had seen the world rebuild itself, twice. She'd seen the rise of cities, the fall of empires, and the quiet cruelty that comes from those closest to you. Her house had always been full of noise, the laughter of her children, the clinking of fine china, the sound of rain on the old roof. But now, silence was all that stayed. She'd built a life from nothing, a business that carried her name, Hayes and Partners Holdings, Inkwater Hotels, investments, real estate. Everything she'd ever touched turned into something of worth. And yet, that morning, when the nurse came to her door, she was no longer Mrs. Hayes, the founder, the investor, the matriarch. She was just resident 47 at Golden Acres Retirement Home. The day it happened had been quiet, too. Her son Daniel stood near the window pretending to check his phone. Her daughter Linda smiled too wide, her lipstick trembling on every word. "Mom, this place is wonderful," Linda said. "They'll take care of you here. You'll have friends, activities, peace, peace." That word had never sounded so final. Margaret remembered staring at the paper on the table, the form that would move her out of her own home temporarily. She remembered the pen in her son's hand, the way he held it like it was mercy. "You can trust us, Mom," Daniel said, but his eyes never met hers. The doors of Golden Acres closed behind her with a hiss. She thought of the dozens of contracts she had signed through her life. Mergers, deals, acquisitions. Every one of them had meant something, except this one. The halls smelled of lavender and disinfectant, smiles everywhere, painted on, the sound of TV laughter leaking through half-closed doors. A young nurse named Emma helped her unpack. She was gentle, with warm eyes and that kind of kindness that doesn't ask questions. Margaret wanted to dislike her. She didn't, because Emma treated her not like a patient, but like a person. Still, when the lights went out that night and Margaret lay awake in a bed that wasn't hers, the truth sank in. Her children had not placed her here for care. They had placed her here for convenience. Weeks passed. She learned the rhythm of the place. Breakfast at 8, pills at 10, bingo at 3. Everything had its time. Everything had its reason. Everything had its silence. But the silence inside her, that was different. It was not the silence of age. It was the silence before a storm. One morning, while sipping weak tea, she overheard two nurses talking near the vending machine. "She's the one, right? The hotel lady? Her kids sold everything. Big scandal." Margaret's hand froze mid-air. She didn't flinch, didn't react, just listened. So that's how she found out. Her children had sold her company, the empire she'd built, without her knowing. That evening, Emma noticed the old woman sitting in the dark. "Are you all right, Mrs. Hayes?" Margaret smiled faintly. "Do I look all right?" Emma hesitated. "You seem different tonight." "I am," Margaret said softly, "because I finally remembered who I am." She turned toward the window. Her reflection caught the faint glow of the moonlight. Her eyes were steady, cold, alive. The world had taken everything from her once before. During the war, during the recession, during her husband's passing, she'd rebuilt every single time, and this time would be no different. She started small. She wrote. Every night after everyone fell asleep, she opened her old notebook, the one she'd hidden in her drawer. Names, numbers, contacts, people she once helped, lawyers she once trusted, favors she'd never used. Her hands shook, but her handwriting didn't. "I am not done," she whispered, not to the walls, not to God, but to herself. The next morning, when Emma came in, she noticed something new. The smell of fresh ink, a calmness in the air. Mrs. Hayes wasn't just surviving anymore. She was planning. Emma smiled. "Good morning." "Good morning, dear," Margaret said. "Would you mind bringing me a list of law firms in Boston?" Emma blinked. "Law firms? Yes, I believe it's time I speak to an old friend." And as Emma left the room, confused, Margaret closed her notebook and whispered, half to herself, half to the ghosts of her past, "They think I'm done. They've forgotten I was the one who taught them how to win." 2 months had passed since Margaret learned the truth. 2 months of silence, 2 months of patience. Her eyes no longer drifted aimlessly. They searched. Every gesture, every phone call, every visit from her children. She studied it like a chess player reading the board before the final move. Emma noticed the change. "Mrs. Hayes, you look different lately," she said, setting down her tea. "I am," Margaret replied. "When people take everything from you, you either disappear or you return as someone they can't control." Every morning before breakfast, Margaret sat by the window with her old notebook, her ledger of life. It was no longer a list of numbers or deals. Now it was a map. She wrote one phrase on the top of a page: "Everything built with integrity can be rebuilt." Her fingers trembled as she wrote. But her focus didn't waver. Every line was another step toward reclaiming what had been stolen, not just her money, but her name. Then one morning, a letter arrived. No return address. A crisp white envelope with familiar handwriting. Emma brought it in. "You've got mail, Mrs. Hayes." Margaret opened it carefully, her heart tightening with a strange mix of hope and dread. The letter was from Thomas Owen, her old accountant, the man who'd helped her launch Hayes and Partners decades ago. "Mrs. Hayes, I've heard what your children did, but not all of your holdings were transferred. You still own a small number of primary shares. With your authorization, I can move quietly to restore part of your control before the board realizes what's happening. I won't act without your word. Thomas Owen." Margaret folded the letter, pressing it to her chest. Her pulse quickened. It wasn't over, not even close. That night, she called Emma to her room. "Do you still have that tablet you lent me?" "Yes, why?" "I need to send a few emails." Emma frowned. "Mrs. Hayes, do you even remember your passwords?" Margaret smiled. "Oh, darling, I remember everything worth remembering." She typed slowly, deliberately. Each message was a spark, one to an old lawyer, one to a retired notary, one to a trusted friend at the bank. No threats, no drama, just quiet, precise communication, the kind that moves mountains before anyone hears the rumble. A week later, a visitor arrived. Tall man, gray suit, eyes sharp but kind. Emma showed him in. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, tipping his head slightly. "It's been 30 years. 32, she corrected him. "You still forget the details, Michael." Michael Rhodes, her former attorney, they'd built empires together. They also buried secrets together. And now he stood there, older but loyal. She handed him Thomas Owen's letter. "I need this done quietly," she said. "Quietly is my favorite word," he replied. For the next 2 hours, the two of them spoke in hushed tones, names, banks, legal gaps. Emma watched from across the room, not understanding half of what they said, but she understood one thing clearly. Margaret wasn't planning a complaint. She was planning a counterattack. When Michael left, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in years. Control. Not full, not yet, but enough to breathe differently. That evening, Linda arrived with that same fake warmth in her voice. "Mom, you look wonderful." "We were thinking, maybe it's time to make things easier for you financially. We could help manage what's left of your assets." Margaret smiled sweetly. "Oh, don't worry, darling. I already have someone managing things." Linda blinked. "Who?" "I did." Her tone was so calm, so natural that it didn't even register. Linda thought she was confused, and that was her mistake. When the door closed, Margaret whispered to Emma, "They still think I'm weak." Emma smiled faintly. Maybe that's your strength. Exactly, said Margaret. Let them underestimate me. It makes the ending better. Days turned into weeks. Papers were filed, accounts reopened, documents corrected. Step by step, the empire she had built from the ground up began to shift back into her hands. Every night she thanked the quiet. It was the one ally her children never respected. They filled their lives with noise, deals, meetings, fake smiles. But Margaret knew, real power lives in silence. One afternoon she received a call from Michael. "It's done," he said. "You now hold the controlling interest again. Your children have no idea." Margaret closed her eyes. The corners of her mouth lifted slightly. "Thank you, Michael. You don't sound surprised." "Because I never doubted it." In the dining hall that evening, whispers began. The old woman in room 203 was suddenly getting mail every day. Packages, documents, even flowers from strangers. The staff started treating her differently, respectfully, carefully. People could feel when someone carried power again. Emma leaned in as they watched the sunset. "Everyone's talking about you." "Let them," Margaret said. "Let them remember what it looks like when a woman refuses to fade." That night, as the lights dimmed, she looked at her reflection in the window again. This time, she didn't see the forgotten mother. She saw the woman who built an empire twice, once from ambition and once from ashes. And she whispered to the empty room, "You took everything from me, but you forgot who taught you how to take." The morning light spilled into the room, sharp and golden, cutting through the dust like a blade. Margaret Hayes was already awake. She never slept much anymore. There was too much to do, too much left to balance. She had been patient long enough. On the small table beside her bed lay a neat stack of papers. Legal filings, board memos, letters from Michael Rhodes, her lawyer. Every one of them was a piece of a puzzle she had been assembling for months. Emma entered quietly, carrying tea. "You've been up since 5 again, haven't you?" Margaret smiled faintly. "Revenge doesn't sleep, dear. It plans." By now, her children had started to notice the changes. The first sign came in the form of a phone call. Daniel's voice was tight, rehearsed. "Mom, the board's been asking strange questions. Something about ownership documents. Did you sign anything recently?" Margaret's voice was calm. "Oh, Daniel, I sign all sorts of things. Receipts, cards, petitions to improve the food here. You should try it sometime. It's liberating." He hesitated. "Mom, this isn't funny. You're confusing people." "No," she said. "I'm reminding them who's in charge." And she hung up. That afternoon, Michael Rhodes visited again. His expression told her everything before he even spoke. "They're panicking," he said. "Your son's been calling everyone. Your daughter tried to contact the old bank manager. It's chaos." "Good," Margaret said, stirring her tea. "Let them taste uncertainty. It builds character." Michael chuckled. "Remind me never to get on your bad side, Mrs. Hayes." "You're too late, Michael," she replied with a smirk. "You've been there since 1973. Over the next few weeks, the transformation was complete. Margaret's legal claim over the remaining company shares was validated. The courts confirmed what she already knew. Her consent years ago had been signed under medical duress and therefore was void. She was once again the controlling shareholder of Hayes and Partners Holdings, Incos, but she didn't want it back for the money. No. She wanted something better, justice wrapped in silence. Her children came to visit shortly after the news reached them. They walked in together, dressed neatly, smiles strained, like actors reading from a bad script. Linda carried flowers. Daniel brought a box of chocolates, as if sugar could sweeten betrayal. "Mom, we heard about—" "The situation," Linda began. "Situation?" Margaret asked softly. "Oh, darling, it's not a situation, it's a correction." Daniel frowned. "You went behind our backs. You could have talked to us." "I did," she said. "You just weren't listening." Linda shifted in her seat. "Mom, we can fix this together. You're not thinking clearly." Margaret looked at her daughter for a long moment, not with anger, but with deep, measured disappointment. "Linda, I've spent a lifetime thinking clearly. You just never liked where those thoughts led." They stayed for less than an hour, and when they left, Emma found Margaret sitting in silence, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "I'm fine," Margaret said. "They're the ones who aren't. They still believe this is about inheritance. It's not. It's about integrity." The next morning, Margaret made a call to Thomas Owen. "I want to transfer my shares to a trust," she said. "A trust? For the children?" "No," she replied, "for the forgotten." That trust would later be known as the Second Sunrise Foundation, a charitable network for elderly people abandoned by their families, funding, housing, companionship. Everything Margaret had been denied, she would give to others. Emma was stunned when she heard the plan. "You're donating everything," Margaret nodded. "Not everything, just what was taken. I'm taking it back only to give it somewhere it'll matter." She looked out the window where autumn leaves swirled in small golden storms. "Do you know what power really is, Emma? No. It's not control. It's the ability to choose mercy when revenge would be easier." But even mercy has rules. 2 weeks later, Daniel arrived again, this time alone. He looked older, thinner, shaken. "Mom, you can't do this. The foundation's in your name. It'll destroy our reputation." Margaret chuckled quietly. "Your reputation? Oh, Daniel, I'm not the one who abandoned anyone." He stepped closer, desperate. "Please, we're still your family." Her tone was soft, almost gentle. Family is earned, not inherited. He didn't answer, and she didn't stop him when he left. That night, as rain tapped against the window, Emma found Margaret sitting in the dark again. But this time, there was peace in her face. Not triumph, not pride. Peace. "Did you mean what you said today?" Emma asked. "About mercy?" Margaret smiled. "I did. Mercy isn't letting them off the hook. It's giving them the space to hang themselves with their own choices." Days later, a reporter came by to interview her about the Second Sunrise Foundation. Margaret was polite, calm, and careful. But when asked about her children, she simply said, "They're learning what most people never do, that regret doesn't come with refunds." The article went viral within days. People called her the lady who outsmarted her own family. Margaret didn't read the headlines. She'd had her fill of noise. The next week, she asked Emma for one small favor. "Can you help me write 2 letters? Of course, to whom? My children, one for each." The letters were short, elegant, brutal in their honesty. To Daniel, "You were my strength once, then you mistook it for your right. Now, learn what it means to build something that's yours." To Linda, "You feared becoming me. That fear turned you cruel. But it's not too late to grow into someone better." She sealed them both and handed them to Emma. "When the time is right," she said, "mail them. Not before." That night, she looked through the window one last time before going to bed. The reflection staring back wasn't the frail woman they left in the nursing home months ago. It was Margaret Hayes, the woman who built, lost, and reclaimed everything without raising her voice. Her empire was back, her dignity restored, her silence louder than any revenge. The day of the hearing arrived quietly. No grand drama, no flashing cameras, just gray skies, cool air, and the faint echo of raindrops against the courthouse windows. Margaret Hayes sat in her wheelchair near the front of the courtroom, dressed in her favorite navy coat, her posture perfect. Emma stood behind her, hands gently on the handles. Michael Rhodes sat to her left, papers neatly arranged, expression calm but sharp. Across the aisle sat Daniel and Linda, the children who had once called her Mom and now called her the plaintiff. They didn't look her in the eye. Guilt has a way of lowering even the proudest heads. When the judge entered, the room shifted. The sound of shuffling papers and hushed whispers filled the air. It wasn't a criminal case, just a formal review of the property and trust transfers. But everyone knew there was more at stake than money. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at the file. "Mrs. Hayes," he said gently, "you are requesting to retain full control of your assets and the right to manage your newly established foundation independently. Is that correct?" Margaret nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, that's correct." Daniel rose to his feet. "Your Honor, my sister and I only acted in our mother's best interest. She's elderly, vulnerable, and we feared she was being manipulated." Michael leaned forward, his voice cutting through the silence. "With respect, Your Honor, Mrs. Hayes may be elderly, but she's anything but vulnerable. She's the architect of her own fortune. The only manipulation here," he paused, glancing at Daniel and Linda, "is the one that tried to erase her." The judge studied Margaret for a long moment. "Mrs. Hayes," he said softly, "do you believe your children acted out of greed?" She smiled faintly, her voice calm but steady. "I believe they acted out of fear, Your Honor. Fear that I would live long enough to see what they'd become." A few quiet gasps rippled through the room. Daniel looked down. Linda bit her lip. Michael presented the documents, the original contracts, the proof of misrepresentation, the timeline of transactions. Each page was a story of betrayal written in legal ink. When he finished, the room fell silent again. The judge exhaled slowly. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "you built something remarkable. You were wronged by those you trusted most. But what you did after shows a strength most of us can only hope for." He turned to her children. "The court recognizes Mrs. Hayes as the sole rightful owner of her assets and the founder of the Second Sunrise Foundation. All power of attorney previously assigned to her children is hereby revoked." The gavel struck once, a single decisive sound that echoed like thunder. Margaret didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply closed her eyes and whispered a quiet "thank you." Daniel and Linda stood frozen, not in anger, but in disbelief. They had lost more than wealth. They had lost the illusion of control. As the courtroom began to empty, Daniel took a hesitant step forward. "Mom." She turned to him, her gaze calm but firm. "Daniel, you were a good boy once. I hope you find that part of yourself again before it's too late." He nodded, tears in his eyes, but she had already turned away. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world smelled clean again, like something had finally been washed away. Emma pushed the wheelchair slowly through the courtyard. "You did it," she whispered. Margaret smiled faintly. "No, dear. I simply reminded them who I've always been." They stopped by a small marble bench beneath a blooming cherry tree. Margaret reached out and touched one of the petals that had fallen onto her lap. "So delicate," she said, "and yet it survives every storm." Weeks later, the Second Sunrise Foundation held its opening ceremony. Hundreds of elderly guests, volunteers, and community leaders filled the newly renovated building. On the front wall hung a plaque, "For those the world forgot, may they remember themselves again." Monsieur Hayes' Margaret didn't make a speech. She just watched as a group of seniors shared stories, laughed, and held hands. Strangers who finally had somewhere to belong. And in that moment, she felt something she hadn't in years. Peace that didn't need victory. That night, back in her room, Emma helped her settle into bed. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. Margaret thought for a long moment before answering. "No. Regret is for those who wait too long to act. I didn't." She looked out the window at the moonlight spilling across the floor. "I built an empire once," she said softly, "but this feels like the first time I built something that matters." As Emma turned off the light and quietly left the room, Margaret whispered to the darkness, "Let them remember me not for what I had, but for what I refused to lose, myself." The night was still, the air calm, and for the first time in years, she slept without a single restless thought. Epilogue. Months later, the Second Sunrise Foundation had expanded to 3 states. Margaret's story had become a legend, not of revenge, but of resilience. People didn't talk about the fortune she regained. They talked about the dignity she restored for thousands of others. A reporter once asked Emma, "What was Mrs. Hayes really like?" Emma smiled. She was like the sunrise, quiet, steady, and unstoppable once it began,